The silence inside the reinforced cabin was heavier than the crushing gravity of the ice moon outside. Kalen Vance sat in the dark, the orange glow of his cigar the only light in the room, illuminating the jagged scars that ran down his forearms like a roadmap of bad decisions. Outside, the wind of Krios 4 howled with a violence that could strip flesh from bone, but Kalen wasn't listening to the storm. He was listening to the rhythmic, terrifying thud of hydraulic footsteps vibrating through the permafrost, steps that were getting louder with every heartbeat. He looked down at the floor where a thermal blanket rose and fell with the soft breathing of two alien fugitives. A small, white-furred child curling into the protective warmth of his mother. The mother, a creature of breathtaking predatory beauty with eyes like shattered sapphires, was awake. She watched Kalen with a mixture of terror and trust, her claws digging into the floorboards. Kalen didn't speak. He simply racked the slide of his modified kinetic shotgun, the metallic clack-clack sounding like a death sentence in the freezing air. He had spent 10 years on this frozen rock trying to forget that he was the deadliest shock trooper the Terran Coalition had ever produced. But as the proximity alarms turned from amber to a screaming crimson, Kalen realized that his retirement was officially over. The Syndicate death squad outside thought they were hunting helpless prey. They had no idea they were breaking into the den of a monster who had finally found something worth killing for. To understand why a man would choose to live in a frozen hellscape, you have to understand the heat of the war he left behind. Kalen Vance was a ghost story whispered in military academies, the commander who had held the line at Gate 9 against a horde of insurrectionists. But glory leaves a bitter taste when it's bought with the blood of civilians. Disillusioned and broken by the Coalition's corruption, Kalen had exiled himself to Krios 4, a planet designated as uninhabitable by the star charts. For 5 years, his life was a brutal, meditative loop of survival. He woke up when the twin pale suns crested the glaciers, spent his days chopping dense ironwood that was harder than concrete, and spent his nights trying to drown out the memories of screaming cities. The cold was his only companion. It numbed the phantom pain in his cybernetically reconstructed shoulder and kept the galaxy's politics a billion miles away. He was a man waiting to die, finding a grim satisfaction in the unforgiving purity of the ice. The day his life changed began like any other Tuesday, with a blizzard that turned the world into a blinding sheet of white. Kalen was checking his perimeter traps, trudging through waist-deep snow, when he saw a flash of color that didn't belong. In a world of grays and whites, the object was a stark, unnatural blue. He approached cautiously, his rifle raised, expecting a trap or a predator. Instead, he found a bundle of rags half buried in a snowdrift. He brushed the snow away and froze. It was a child, or the alien equivalent of one. The species was Vulprin, rare and elusive, known for their crystalline white fur and empathic abilities. But this cub was fading fast. His fur was matted with ice, his blue bioluminescent markings were dimming to a dull grey, and his small body was rigid with hypothermia. The logical part of Kalen's brain, the soldier part, told him to walk away. "Nature is cruel," it whispered. "Involvement brings complications." But as Kalen looked down, the cub's eyelids fluttered open. Massive, violet eyes stared up at him, filled not with fear, but with a heartbreaking resignation. The kid didn't cry out. He was too weak. He just reached out a small, clawed hand and grasped Kalen's armored finger, holding on as if the human was the only solid thing in the universe. That small, desperate grip shattered 5 years of carefully constructed apathy. Cursing softly, Kalen slung his rifle and scooped the child up. The cub weighed almost nothing, a skeleton wrapped in silk and frost. Kalen unzipped his thermal jacket and tucked the alien against his chest, sharing his body heat as he sprinted back to the cabin. He kicked the door shut against the howling wind and laid the child by the fusion heater, crushing a nutrient pack into warm water to make a slurry. As he fed the starving creature, watching the blue glow slowly return to the cub's skin, Kalen felt a dangerous emotion stirring in his chest, a sense of purpose. But as the cub finally drifted into a peaceful sleep, Kalen's wrist comp chirped. It wasn't a weather warning. It was a bioscan alert. Someone was scanning the sector from orbit, and they were looking for the boy. Kalen moved to the window, watching the sky, and saw the telltale streak of a dropship entering the atmosphere. He had saved the boy, but in doing so, he had just invited a war to his doorstep. The storm outside intensified, masking the sound of the intruder until it was too late. Kalen was cleaning his weapon when the heavy timber of his back window exploded inward. He spun, leveling his pistol, but held his fire. Standing in the debris and swirling snow was a creature from a nightmare or a dream. It was a female vulprin, tall and lithe, her white fur shimmering like diamond dust in the firelight. She was injured, bleeding blue blood from a gash on her flank, but her posture was pure lethal aggression. She bared needle-like fangs, her sapphire eyes locking onto Kalen, then darting to the sleeping cub. She snarled, a low vibrato sound that rattled Kalen's ribs, crouching to spring. She thought he was a captor. Kalen didn't shout. He slowly holstered his pistol, raising his open palms. "He's safe," Kalen said, his voice low and steady. "Look, he's warm. He's fed." The female paused, her ears twitching. She sniffed the air, smelling the nutrient paste and the lack of fear on the child. Slowly, the murderous rage drained from her, replaced by a staggering exhaustion. She stumbled, and Kalen caught her before she hit the floor. What followed was a week of strange, quiet domesticity that terrified Kalen more than any battlefield. Her name was Alara. She was a highborn of her people, fleeing the Obsidian Syndicate, a group of high-tech slavers who harvested rare species for their genetic material. The cabin, once a tomb of silence, became alive. Kalen found himself falling into a routine he hadn't known he craved. He would watch Rin, the cub, mimicking his movements. When Kalen chopped wood, Rin would pick up a stick and hit the logs. When Kalen cleaned his gear, Rin would watch with wide, fascinated eyes. But it was Alara who unnerved him. She moved with a feline grace that made the cramped cabin feel small. There was a language barrier, but they learned to speak in gestures and touches. One evening, as Kalen changed the dressing on her flank, Alara reached out and placed her hand on his scarred chest, directly over his heart. Her palm was incredibly warm, and a soft, purring vibration traveled from her hand into his skin. It was an empathic link. She was sharing her gratitude, her relief, and something deeper, hotter, that made Kalen's breath hitch. They sat there in the firelight, a disgraced human soldier and an alien princess, realizing that they were two broken halves of the same whole. But peace on Krios 4 is a fragile illusion. On the seventh day, the reality of their situation crashed down. Rin was playing near the comms console when he accidentally triggered a frequency search. The radio burst to life, cutting through the static with a voice that made Kalen's blood run cold. "Target biosignature confirmed in Sector 4. Deploy the hunter-killers. Leave no witnesses." It was the Syndicate. They hadn't just found them. They were already here. Alara gasped, pulling Rin close, her eyes wide with panic. "They will burn this whole mountain to get us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You must leave us, Kalen. You can escape through the pass." Kalen looked at the woman who had brought warmth back to his frozen world. He looked at the boy who called him Papa in a language he barely understood. He walked to the wall and pulled down a heavy tarp, revealing a terrifying arsenal of heavy weaponry he had vowed never to use again. He turned to Alara, his eyes hard as flint. "I'm not going anywhere," he growled, racking a fresh power cell into his assault cannon. "Let them come. I'm going to teach them why the devil wears human skin." Kalen killed the lights and kicked the table over to form a barricade, just as the first red laser dot danced across Alara's forehead. The first wave hit with the subtlety of a meteor strike. The front wall of the cabin disintegrated as a Syndicate breaching charge detonated, filling the room with splintered wood and freezing air. Kalen didn't hesitate. He unleashed a storm of suppression fire through the smoke, his assault cannon turning the first two attackers into mist. "Get to the cellar!" he roared to Alara, but she refused to hide. With a feral hiss, she leaped over the barricade, moving faster than the human eye could track. Her claws, usually retracted, extended into translucent blades that sliced through the syndicate armor like paper. It was a chaotic dance of violence, Kalen providing the thunder with his heavy weapons, and Alara providing the lightning with her speed. They fought back to back, a seamless unit of destruction. Kalen took a grazing shot to the ribs, the smell of cauterized flesh mixing with the ozone of plasma fire. But the pain only sharpened his focus. The syndicate, realizing a ground assault was failing, escalated the engagement. A terrifying mechanical shriek tore through the wind as a Titan-class walker crested the ridge. Its spotlight blinded them, pinning them in the ruins of the cabin. "It's a heavy mech!" Kalen yelled, dragging Alara behind the reinforced fireplace. The walker's rotary cannon spun up, and bullets the size of soda cans began to chew through their cover. The noise was deafening, a continuous roar of destruction. Rin was screaming in the cellar. Kalen checked his ammo. He was low. He looked at Alara. She was terrified, but her eyes were fierce. "I can disable it," she shouted over the gunfire. "My people. We can channel bioelectricity, but I need to get close." It was a suicide run. The ground between them and the walker was a kill zone. "No," Kalen said, grabbing her arm. "You stay with the boy." He handed her his sidearm. "If I don't come back, you aim for the pilot's viewport." Before she could argue, Kalen grabbed a bundle of thermal detonators and sprinted into the open. The walker's guns swiveled to track him. The snow erupted around his feet as he zigzagged through the fire, drawing every ounce of attention to himself. He took a hit to his leg, stumbling, but momentum carried him forward. He slid under the massive legs of the machine, primed the explosives, and jammed them into the hydraulic knee joint. "Eat this, you ugly bastard!" he screamed, rolling away just as the detonators blew. The explosion sheared the walker's leg off. The machine toppled with a groan of twisting metal, crashing down just inches from where Kalen lay in the snow. But as the smoke cleared, a second squad of soldiers emerged from the tree line, surrounding the wounded human. Kalen tried to reach for his knife, but his body wouldn't obey. He closed his eyes, accepting the end, until a white blur shot past him. Alara stood over Kalen's broken body, her entire form glowing with blinding blue energy, and for the first time, the Syndicate soldiers stopped advancing. Because they realized they weren't fighting a refugee anymore. They were fighting an apex predator protecting her mate. The standoff lasted only a second. Alara let out a scream that was less sound and more psychic shockwave. The bioluminescent energy stored in her cells erupted outward, not as a weapon, but as a blinding flashbang that overloaded the night vision optics of the Syndicate squad. In their momentary blindness, the remaining perimeter defenses Kalen had rigged, automated turrets buried in the snow, came online. The clearing was bathed in crossfire. It was over in seconds. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Alara dropped to her knees beside Kalen, her glow fading to a soft, frantic pulse. She pressed her hands to his wounds, her purring vibration frantic now, trying to knit his flesh together with her limited healing ability. "Stay with me," she chirped, tears freezing on her fur. You promised you wouldn't die." Kalen coughed, tasting copper, and reached up to wipe a tear from her cheek. "I'm hard to kill," he wheezed, forcing a grin. Recovery was slow, but the solitude of the ice world had been replaced by something warmer. Days turned into weeks as Kalen healed. The cabin was a ruin, but it was their ruin. A Terran patrol vessel eventually responded to the distress beacon from the destroyed walker. When the dropship landed, the captain, an old friend of Kalen's, stepped out expecting to find a frozen corpse. Instead, he found Kalen Vance sitting on a crate, bandaged but upright, cleaning his shotgun. Rin was sitting on his shoulders, braiding Kalen's grey hair. Alara stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. The captain looked at the dead syndicate tech littered across the valley, then at the strange, beautiful family standing before him. "You know, Vance," the captain said, shaking his head, "we could reinstate you. Full honors. The Coalition could use a man who can take down a walker with a grenade." Kalen looked at the stars, then at Alara. He thought about the cold, empty barracks, the meaningless wars, and the silence of his old life. Then he felt Rin's small hands on his head and the warmth of Alara's hip against his arm. "Tell Command I'm dead," Kalen said, taking Alara's hand. "Tell them the cold finally got me." The captain smiled, nodded, and boarded his ship, leaving them behind. As the ship's thrusters faded into the sky, Kalen turned back to his family. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the masters of this world. Kalen picked Rin up and wrapped his arm around Alara's waist, walking back toward the warmth of the fusion heater. The galaxy could keep its wars and its politics. Kalen Vance had found the only mission that mattered, and he would pity the fool who ever tried to interrupt his retirement again. He gave them his fire to keep them warm, and in return they gave him a reason to never feel the cold again.